Alright, welcome to Solving by Completing the Square. And what I'm going to do, I've got an example written here. Notice the difference here. These are equations where we have something equals something else. It's not a function, it's an equation. And we're going to use the technique of completing the square, but we're allowed to work with both sides again, so that makes life a little bit easier. So I'm going to show you how we solve this with completing the square. Notice right away I can't factor this. So it's not even an option to use factoring. So we have to use something else. So we kind of work our way around it by doing the following. We leave the x squared term and the 10x, and we move the minus 3. We get that to the other side. Notice I left a little space because now I'm going to complete the square. And remember, our little recipe is that you take half of the number in front of x, so half of 10, which is 5, and then I'm going to take that number and I'm going to square it. And that's the number that I put in to complete the square. So it's plus 25. Now, because I'm working with an equation, an easy way to compensate is to do the same thing to the other side. I don't have to worry about plus 25 and then taking 25 away. It's an equation. Just do the same thing to the other side, and it works just fine. So now, on the left side, I can factor this. So I've got x plus half of the 10 here. So that's plus 5 squared. And notice again, because this is plus, I made this plus. And on the right side, we have 3 plus 25, so that's 28. Now I'm ready to square root both sides. So when I square root the left side, it's going to get rid of the squaring. And when I square root the right side, I just got to remember to put in plus or minus. Okay? So on the left side, I'm down to x plus 5. And on the right side, I have plus or minus the square root of 28. And I'm just going to break that into a lower, simpler form. I can break up root 28 by doing this. Root 4 times root 7, because 4 times 7 makes 28. And that allows me to write it like this, plus or minus 2 root 7. It's just a simpler radical form. And so my final answer to solve for x is to bring the 5 over to this side. So it's going to be negative 5 plus or minus 2 root 7. And I can leave my answer like that. That's a nice exact number, which is, it's appreciated sometimes. If I were to work this out on a calculator, I would get a decimal approximation. So sometimes you want to leave them as exact answers unless you actually have to work it out because there's an actual answer that's needed. Okay, I'm going to clear the screen and I'm going to do another example. This one's a little more complicated, so we'll start right at the top here. So we got negative 4x squared plus 9x and equals a bunch of stuff on the right side. So we got 2x minus 1. Okay, first things first. I'm going to bring this 2x over to the left side. So I have negative 4x squared. And I'm going to take away 2x from both sides. So this becomes plus 7x and equals negative 1. The next thing that I'm going to do is whatever number happens to be in front of the x squared, easiest thing to do is to divide all terms by that number. And that way you get rid of it. So I'm going to divide everything by negative 4. So 7 divided by negative 4 becomes minus 7/4 x. I'm going to leave a little bit of a space, and I'm going to divide this one also by negative 4. So this becomes positive 1/4. So every term divided by negative 4. Now I've got to complete the square. So we'll do that on the side here. I need half of that negative 7/4. So that's going to be negative 7/8. And I got to square that. So if I square it out, I'm going to get a positive number, and I'm going to get 49 on the top and 8 squared, or 64, on the bottom. So that's what I'm going to put in on both sides. So plus 49 over 64. And I do exactly the same thing over here. Plus 49 over 64. Okay, so just separate that away. And now I can complete, now that the square is completed, I can factor this very nicely. So it's going to be x all squared. Now I got a minus sign right here, so that means this is going to be minus. And then here I just think, well, what times itself gives me 49 over 64? Well, that would be 7 over 8. Okay, and equals. Now here, I'm going to want to put these two fractions together, so I'm going to build a common denominator. So I'm going to times this guy by 16, top and bottom. Okay, so I'm going to have 64 as my common denominator. And on the top, I'm going to have 16 plus 49. So that's, let's see, 65. Okay. Now, I've got everything ready. I'm going to square root both sides. So here we go. Square root all that. And we're going to square root all this, remembering that it is plus or minus. Okay, so on the left side, I'm down to x minus 7 over 8. And on the right side, I'm actually going to split the fraction so that we have plus or minus the square root of 65 on the top. And on the bottom, it just happens to work out rather nicely that the square root of 64 is 8. So now I'm going to add the 7/8 over. And typically, it's written these answers as one fraction. So they both have the same denominator of 8. We've added the 7/8 over, so this is now a positive 7. And then we have plus or minus the square root of 65. And that is the end of that example. And we wouldn't bother working that to decimals unless there was a context and we absolutely had to. But this is a nice exact number. That's a great answer. And that's where I'm going to stop, because now we can solve any quadratic equations.